Welcome to this session on how to make Apricot actionable, tasks, to-dos, reminders, and quality control. This is an exciting session because we're going to cover some of the top ways to make the most of Apricot. I'm glad you could join us. My name is Jeff Hagwood. I'm an Apricot software consultant at Sidekick Solutions. At Sidekick Solutions, we help new and existing users make the most of Apricot software. We do the heavy lifts in Apricot so you can focus on what matters most to you. This session is about taking your Apricot from a database to an everyday productivity application or business application. During this session, we will define the Apricot tools you can use to build workflows from scratch. We're going to share 7 ways to prompt users to take the next action in Apricot. We're going to explore how to surface information that might feel buried in your Apricot system, and then we're going to wrap up with some key takeaways. All right, let's dive in. Now, most users in Apricot are going to comment that when it comes to data entry, Apricot's intuitive and easy to use. Entering data into forms generally makes sense to most users. The navigation's fairly streamlined, and data entry will come naturally. Once the data is entered into Apricot, most users rely on the Tier 1 search screen and the Tier 1 document folder to organize and find information. Now, while those two features are powerful standard tools, they don't always give users the information needed to take action in Apricot. That means that data can often feel buried in Apricot using the Tier 1 search or the document folder. And when you rely on those two tools, users have to remember what their tasks and their to-dos are in Apricot. This generally prompts users to manage those tasks outside of Apricot in Excel trackers or Post-it notes or some other system, and that's not ideal. They may be asking questions like, how do I know which clients require follow-up? Or maybe something like, what assessments do I need to complete and when? They may also be asking questions like, are my clients on track with our program model? Are we tracking towards program fidelity? And lastly, how can I remember to keep my cases up to date? More directly, how can we use Apricot to make it even easier for users to know which actions to take, when to take them, and to plan for next steps before they creep up into the overdue bucket? Now, first we need to understand the vocabulary and tools available to us in Apricot. Some of these tools are standard, and some are premium features available in Apricot Core and Apricot 360. When it comes to making Apricot actionable, what do we have to work with? Well, first we have form design, specifically the field choices and the linking that builds conditional logic on a form. The second tool that we have at our disposal is logic and conditionality in reports, specifically the ability to create dynamic reports and user tools with custom report expressions. We also have bulletins. Bulletins are like dashboards, and those can be used for centering actionable data up front for users on the Apricot home screen. And then lastly, we can use email triggers. Email triggers are used for immediate or delayed notifications to prompt users to take a next step. Second, before we start building actionable tools in Apricot, we recommend mapping out your workflow in 3 steps. This is going to help us identify how our workflows operate and where those trigger or pivot points happen, where a tool like Apricot might help us take the next step and remain actionable. So there's a 3-step process that we recommend. Number 1, diagram or write out your workflow. Number 2, once that's mapped out, lay it on the floor, stand over the top of it, and identify the trigger or pivot points in your workflow where Apricot might support those next steps. And then step 3, build and test a solution in Apricot. For step one, there's really no need to overcomplicate the process. You can either diagram out your workflow, like shown on the left, or you could simply write it out in a bullet point list of steps, like shown on the right. The important piece here is to identify conditional logic, steps that require decisions, and be detailed enough that the outline will enable you to develop Apricot solutions to support that workflow. Now, step two is to identify the trigger or pivot points in that workflow. Once you have the workflow identified, a trigger or pivot point is a break in the workflow where a user must re-engage at some point to continue the process. This might be something like a 30-day break between follow-ups or waiting for a client's status to shift before completing a new service. These trigger or pivot points are areas where we want to prompt users to stay on track. These are the points where we need to build tools in Apricot to make it more of a productivity application. The last step, and I think it's an important step to remember, is that you should build your solution and test it. At Sidekick Solutions, we generally follow a build framework with a 30-day testing window before we transition to maintenance on a particular solution. So that means that we'll build the solution, deploy it with users, review after 30 days, iterate if we need, and then deploy it into a sustainable long-term solution. So let's take a look at some solutions in Apricot that we can use in terms of configuring our forms, configuring our Apricot database to actually enable these workflow pivot points or triggers. We're going to present 7 during this video: the active status dashboard, a follow-up, a to-do, last created record, a program model to-do, conditional data quality, and then email triggers. Hopefully, some or all of these can be implemented in your own Apricot. So let's start with the active status dashboard. So what is the active status dashboard? The active status dashboard organizes clients or prospective clients by specific criteria, like a caseload or open referrals, or maybe an active roster. So why does this matter? Searching for active clients by assignment using the Tier 1 search takes time. That's time that could be saved simply by listing the information right up front in Apricot. With a caseload report, you can also plan and manage resources and keep clients up front to help case managers maintain touch. Let's go ahead and take a look at a solution in Apricot for a caseload report and how this could be deployed on the front end of Apricot. So if we jump into Apricot and take a look at a report, this here is an active caseload report. We're filtering on all enrollments per client where the exit date is empty, which means they're still active. And we've grouped that report by our case managers. Each case manager can then see their caseload, which program they're enrolled in, the enrollment date, potentially how long they've been enrolled. And then in this report, we've provided quick links to edit the profile or view the folder. So by clicking these links, I can navigate to the profile and make changes to demographics or contact information. Or if I click to view the folder, I can create documents in the Tier 2 document folder. Now, displaying this on the home screen reduces the need to search for a record and reduces the number of clicks that a case manager needs to make in the software. This could also be filtered down by individual case manager or by specific program if you wanted to deploy this in a more segmented fashion rather than across the entire organization all of your programs and all of your sites. The next solution is a follow-up based on two dates. This could be with or without a calculation field, and we'll show you how to do that. So what is this? This is a follow-up indicator that's generally located on the bottom of a form, identifying when the next activity is due, and also when that next item is finally complete. This can be used to build an upcoming and overdue task list. So why does this solution matter? This is kind of a yes, no, complete, incomplete indicator, and there's no workaround, which means if users have not completed the task, it still shows up in a report. You can increase client engagement simply by logging follow-up records using this method. So let's take a look at how this could be done in Apricot. So here we have a referral follow-ups that are due report, and you can see how these follow-ups, or these records, these are actually external referrals, have been queued up because they do not have a follow-up completion date. Now, the moment that we complete this record, it will fall out of this report, which means this report is conditional based on the completion of the task. So I have a clickable link here. I can navigate to my external referral. You can see that my follow-up due date is listed here. And as soon as I enter a completion date, well, let's make it accepted. This record will then fall out of this report. You can see it's no longer listed. So that's a nifty solution that ensures that users actually complete relevant follow-up. This could be applied to external referrals, assessments, case notes, all sorts of records that have a defined follow-up date that needs to be entered by the user. The third solution is a to-do based on two dates where it's on the same form. So what is this? Instead of a post-activity follow-up, like the example we just reviewed, a to-do could preempt entry of a full form. This is best if the next action to complete is a separate form or record, which differentiates it from the follow-up example. For example, let's assume that we're logging an assessment, and that assessment is needed every 30 days, but we're creating a new assessment record every 30 days. We could actually enter the assessment before it's due with a due date, and then come back to it when it's actually due. So why is this solution important? Well, this allows users to self-prompt the next action without conditional logic, and it's best used for tasks in Apricot or things that need to be done in the future. This helps users plan on next steps. So let's take a look at how this could be done in Apricot. Oh, let me run up here. Perfect. Here we have a section of a report where the survey test date on this assessment to complete is empty. I'm going to navigate to this record to show you how we've configured this. We've added a date at the top of the form called the assessment to due date. This allows us to save an assessment before we actually complete the assessment, which means we could push this date forward and it would queue up in our report for us to complete at a later date. The moment we complete the report, we'd put a survey to test date in the record, and that would drop it off the report altogether. We'd no longer see it in our report. Now, if we go back to the folder, what this allows us to do is it allows us to create the assessment as a placeholder record before the user, the case manager, or whomever actually completes it. So let's say my 6-month follow-up is due on May 31st, 2020. It's my 6-month follow-up. I'm not going to enter a survey test date. This is just a placeholder record. And now I have a report that'll tell me when this assessment is due coming up in the future. Again, this is more of a forward-looking report, whereas the follow-up solution that we talked about earlier is more of a post-activity report. The next solution is a to-do based on the last created record of the same type. The last created record option is a dynamic conditional prompt that's baked into the Apricot architecture. Users cannot overwrite or circumvent this style of to-do. The system automatically identifies the next action based on the previous action that was completed. So why does this matter? No manual action is needed. So whereas the follow-up solution and the task-based solutions that we talked about earlier require the user to enter a date or enter a record, there's no manual action required in this solution. The tool updates dynamically based on new data entry over time. This method also supports infinite recurring tasks and can scale actions that have prescriptive logic. So for example, if I need to complete a progress note every 30 days, I can use a last created record report that looks where the last created progress note is greater than 30 days in the past. And that prompts me to create the next one. And that cycle goes on and on and on forever, as long as that logic is maintained in a report. So let's take a look at this in Apricot. So this solution here looks for the last created progress note greater than 30 days ago. If I create a new progress report for test tester, this row will fall off the report because the most recent progress note will no longer be 30 days in the past. So we'll save this record. Go back to our report. And you'll notice the test tester is no longer on this report. Now, test tester will come back onto this report when the progress note that we just created is greater than 30 days in the past. And that prompts me to create another progress note for that individual. So again, this is more of a solution that's baked into the software. As I consecutively enter data in the platform, the report or the dashboard that's helping me be actionable in Apricot is prompting me to take the next step every 30 days. The fifth solution is a to-do based on the program model. This is another dynamic option using report filters and conditionality to find when the next item is due. This is generally a date-based solution across multiple forms, maybe like an initial assessment date that's due after an enrollment, or a release of information that is due at client intake, or potentially a discharge where a final assessment is due within 3 days. You can bake that into your Apricot solution to maintain some fidelity to your program model. So why does this matter? Like I just mentioned, we're reinforcing program fidelity with standard reports that assign to-dos based on a condition, and they don't disappear from the to-do dashboard until they're resolved. This helps us create workflow that might have an off-interval solution. So for instance, if I need to take an assessment 15 days after intake and then 30 days after that, the 15-day after intake solution can be based on a hard-coded 15-day filter. So let's take a look at a solution for an ISP that's due 30 days after enrollment. So this solution here requires that at each enrollment date, we must create a service plan within that 30 days. And once we create a service plan for that individual, that person actually falls off the list. So let's go ahead and open a record here. We can create a service plan, link it to this enrollment. And that individual falls off the report. Now, all of the solutions we've shown up until this point have some form of conditional logic or dynamic nature to them in how they're actually deployed. Similarly, while the solutions we've identified to date are more user front-end solutions, we can also use this type of model for conditional data quality. This can be more of an administrator solution. Conditional data quality reports are reports that show users where they need to correct a gap or complete a step. Logic is dictating the inclusion of a record in this report, so it's removed from the report when it's resolved. An example of this might be an activity or service record that falls outside of an enrollment window. So if I have an enrollment start date and exit date, and the service date is outside of that range, we know that there's a data quality problem. Or if we look at a participant's record and we see that they're not linked to a household, we could use a conditional data quality report to clean that up. So why does a solution like this matter? Well, this can get data quality into the hands of your end users. So an administrator could manage these reports, but you could also push these reports onto end users to clean up themselves. It also allows users to step away from data quality and let systems manage themselves. So instead of remembering to do something in the system can actually help them manage data quality in real time. So let's take a look at an example. In this particular solution, we have clients without a linked family profile. So the moment that I link one of these clients to a family record, that individual will fall out of the report. So if I add them to a family, that individual will actually fall out of the report. And that way, the system is catching us from bad data quality and doing this in real time so we can validate that our data is whole. Another solution that you might consider is where a record is copied without actual data entry. So in this scenario, we actually have the ability to copy an individual service plan in the document folder. And this could be helpful, especially if you're writing out long narratives. You can copy a record. If you copy a record and don't complete the data entry that's required on that record, it can actually come out blank. And so this report here queues up all ISPs that were copied that were not actually completed. So for instance, if I go into this record, let's go back here. If I go into this record, you'll notice that one of the required fields is to select a program enrollment. The only reason that this requirement is not enforced is because you saved the record, copied it, and this record was cleared on copy. So now the moment that I add that, my data quality is whole, that record drops off the report. So the final solution is an email trigger. Email triggers are immediate notifications when a record is saved and a certain batch of criteria is met. You can think of these like a conditional trigger. Now, instead of writing these conditional logic rules to a report, we can actually fire off an email notification to notify individuals of either an approval, a problem with data quality, or something that needs to be done. There are also solutions where you might integrate email triggers on a delay or populate another data system with some information from Apricot, and those can be connected with third-party integration tools. We're not going to go into the full suite of options for delays and integrations on this video, but that is something that can be done, and we'd be happy to talk to you if you have questions about that. So why do these solutions, these email triggers, why do they matter? Well, email triggers are the only external integration platform we have available to us that can be modeled without custom code. We can use these with third-party tools to prompt next actions. We can also integrate with other users who may not have a login in Apricot. So for example, if there's an approval that's needed on a record, and let's say that a director needs to approve a record change in Apricot, but they don't have a login, we can actually notify them outside of Apricot and have them follow up with an internal organizational process. Ultimately, we want all users to be in Apricot, but external notifications can help users either that are outside of the system, or it can help prompt to users get into the system to take a next step. So let's take a look at Apricot real quick here. Let's take a look at how an email trigger is set up. I'm going to go on to our progress node. We're going to open this email trigger. You can identify the recipients of the trigger, the email subject and text associated with that trigger, as well as merge in any data from the record that's been saved. And then you can filter which events will trigger the email, whether a record is created or updated, as well as which fields have been updated and specific criteria. Many of our clients have solutions such as if a client is exited from a program or discharged from a program, notify the program director so they can review the exit information. It's a great way to prompt director or manager level users to get into the system to actually complete a particular review or just to identify when changes in a case occur. One point of caution with email triggers, don't go too wild with email trigger deployment. They can get quite dense and they can be hard to unravel when someone is getting multiple email triggers a day to their inbox. So it's important to keep them lean and keep them use case driven. So in summary, there are a few things we hope that you'll take with you when implementing actionable systems in your own Apricot. Number one, users shouldn't need to remember to do something. That's what your software is for. Apricot should be deployed to help users take the next step. Apricot is much more than a database. Apricot is a business application and productivity application that should be used to support users in their day-to-day workflow. The second thing is that productivity tools are dynamic. They're updating based on new conditions in real time. Solutions like custom reports in Apricot, email triggers, and dashboards are all solutions that can be updated in real time based on engagement in your Apricot license. The third takeaway is not to overload users with tools. One of the things you should consider is to keep to the core, keep to your program fidelity, and then refine from there. So you'll notice if I jump into my Apricot system, my dashboard is relatively lean. I have some shortcuts, I have some dashboard information, maybe I have a link to this report that identifies some gaps in data quality or my active caseload. But the key is not to overwhelm your users with too many tools. Give them the tools that help them do their work best and that enables their day-to-day practice. And then finally, start by identifying gaps in your current workflow with mapping. Our team at Sidekick Solutions leans heavily into workflow mapping, both from a logic model and evaluation perspective, but also just the day-to-day mechanics of how you deliver services. It's very illuminating to map out and lay all of the steps down on the floor, stand over the top, and take an assessment of how your system actually works. That's where you can identify insights that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. And again, looking back at some of the earlier recommendations, that could be a complete workflow diagram, but it doesn't need to be as complicated as that. It could also be a simple bullet point list, a one-pager, or a narrative of how your program operates, and thinking about clients as they transition from intake to discharge. If you can think about the steps that a client takes from intake to discharge, you have a really great frame from which to develop some of these actionable tools in Apricot. That concludes what I wanted to cover for this video. To learn more about Apricot, you can explore our YouTube channel or visit our website at sidekicksolutionsllc.com/apricot. Also, if you like our approach to Apricot and would like to work with us, feel free to send us an email at info@sidekicksolutionsllc.com. Our door is always open. Thank you for watching.